You're not the bride, but you're the only one who can save this wedding." The voice on the phone was calm, almost too calm for a moment that felt like the ground was slipping beneath Emily Carter's feet. It was 2:17 a.m., and the world outside her small apartment was silent, the kind of silence that made everything feel heavier than it should. She sat up slowly, her heart already racing before she even understood why. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice dry, like she already knew the answer would change everything. "Your sister is gone, Emily. She left. The wedding is in 6 hours." The line went quiet for a second, then added, "If you don't step in, your family loses everything." Emily didn't move. Her eyes drifted to the old photo on her nightstand. Her father smiling, before the debts, before the hospital bills, before everything started falling apart. Her sister had always been the one who escaped things. Emily was the one who stayed. "Who is he?" she asked, barely breathing. "Alexander Hayes." The name landed heavy. Even she knew it. Billionaire. Private. Untouchable. The kind of man people talked about like he wasn't entirely real. "I can't," she said, but the words felt weak even as they left her mouth. "You can," the voice replied softly. "And if you do, your father's debt disappears by morning." Silence again. Then the line went dead. By 7:48 a.m., Emily stood in a dressing room that didn't feel like it belonged to her, staring at a wedding dress that wasn't meant for her body. It was too tight in some places, too loose in others, like the life she was about to step into. Her hands trembled as she touched the fabric, soft and expensive, nothing like anything she had ever owned. "You don't have to do this," someone behind her murmured, but Emily already knew that wasn't true. She slipped into the dress anyway. By the time she stepped into the ceremony hall, everything was already set. Flowers, guests, silence that felt rehearsed. No one questioned her. No one looked too closely. It was as if everyone had agreed not to see the truth. And then she saw him. Alexander Hayes stood at the end of the aisle, tall, still, untouched by the tension in the room. His suit was perfectly fitted, his expression unreadable, his eyes distant, like he was already somewhere else. He didn't smile. He didn't react. He just watched her walk toward him like she was part of a transaction already decided. Each step felt unreal, like she was walking into someone else's life frame by frame. When she finally stood in front of him, close enough to see the faint shadows under his eyes, he leaned slightly closer, just enough for his voice to reach her and no one else. "Don't expect anything from me," he said quietly. "No anger, no warmth, just truth." Emily swallowed, her fingers tightening around the bouquet she didn't remember picking up. "I won't," she replied, though her voice trembled just a little. The officiant spoke. Words about love, about union, about forever. None of them felt real. But when the ring was placed in Alexander's hand, everything slowed. He took her hand without hesitation. His touch was firm, controlled, almost cold. The ring slid onto her finger like it belonged there, like it had always been waiting for her. And in that moment, standing beside a man who looked like he trusted nothing and no one, Emily realized something quiet but terrifying. She hadn't just taken her sister's place. She had stepped into a life where nothing was promised and everything could break her. The car ride after the ceremony was quiet in a way that pressed against Emily's chest, like the air itself was watching her, waiting for her to say something she did not have the courage to say. The city moved outside the tinted windows, familiar streets fading into places she had never been, taller buildings, wider roads, a world that felt too large for someone like her. She kept her hands folded in her lap, her fingers lightly touching the ring, still cold against her skin, still unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else. Alexander sat beside her, not looking at her, not speaking, his attention fixed somewhere far beyond the glass, as if the woman he had just married did not exist at all. After what felt like forever, he finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "There are rules." Emily turned slightly, her breath catching without warning. "You will have your own room, your own schedule. You do not need to attend any events unless I tell you. You will not speak to the press, and you will not interfere with my work." Each word landed clean, precise, like he had said this before, like this was something practiced, controlled. Emily nodded softly. "Okay." He did not react to her answer. "This marriage is for 1 year," he continued. "After that, you are free. You will be compensated." The word compensated made something twist quietly inside her, but she swallowed it down. I understand. The car slowed, then stopped. When the door opened, Emily stepped out into a driveway that looked like something out of a magazine, wide and perfectly clean, leading up to a house that did not feel like a home, but something colder, something carefully designed and untouched. Glass walls reflected the pale afternoon light, and everything about it felt too still, too perfect, like no one truly lived there. Inside, it was even quieter. No voices, no movement, just space, endless space. This will be your room, Alexander said as he opened a door without looking at her. The room was beautiful, soft colors, large windows, a bed that looked untouched, but it felt empty in a way Emily could not explain. If you need anything, ask the staff. He paused for a brief second, then added, they have been instructed not to ask questions. Emily let out a small breath she did not realize she had been holding. Thank you. He nodded once, already turning away. Dinner is at 7. You do not have to join me. She watched him walk down the hallway, his steps quiet but certain, his presence fading just as quickly as it had entered her life. And just like that, she was alone. Emily slowly walked further into the room, her fingers brushing against the edge of the dresser, the soft fabric of the curtains, everything too clean, too untouched. She moved toward the window and looked out, the city stretching far beyond the glass, distant and unreachable. Then she noticed it. Across the courtyard, through another wall of glass, a light was already on in one of the rooms. His room. Even in the middle of the day, the light stayed on, steady, unchanging. Emily stared at it a little longer than she meant to, a quiet feeling settling in her chest, something she could not quite name. This house was not just large. It was lonely. And somehow, without understanding why, she felt like the man she had just married might be even lonelier than she was. By the third night, Emily realized that silence in this house was not temporary. It was a rule, something that lived in the walls and followed her from room to room like a quiet shadow. She had not seen Alexander since the afternoon of their arrival, only brief signs of him. A door closing at the end of the hallway, footsteps fading before she could reach the corner, the soft echo of a voice speaking on the phone behind a wall she was not meant to cross. Dinner at 7 had come and gone twice, each time prepared perfectly, each time untouched on the other side of the long table where a single candle burned low and steady, like it was waiting for something that never came. On the third night, she decided to sit anyway. She took a seat at the far end, the chair cool beneath her hands, the table stretching between her and the empty space where he was supposed to be. She picked up her fork slowly, the sound almost too loud in the quiet, and took a small bite, barely tasting the food. The room felt too large for one person, too still, too aware of her presence. Halfway through the meal, she heard it, the faint sound of footsteps approaching. Her heart reacted before her mind could catch up. She set the fork down carefully, her fingers suddenly unsure. Alexander entered without looking at her at first, his attention still on something in his hand, a phone, messages, a world she was not part of. He paused when he noticed her sitting there, as if her presence had interrupted something he had not expected. For a moment, neither of them spoke. You are still awake, he said finally, his voice calm but distant. Emily nodded lightly. I could not sleep. He gave a small nod, like that answer was acceptable, then moved to the other side of the table, not sitting, just standing there, keeping the distance between them. The candlelight reflected softly in his eyes, but it did not warm them. You do not have to wait for me, he added. Emily hesitated, then said quietly, I was not waiting. It was not a lie, but it was not entirely true either. Something in his expression shifted, just slightly, like he was trying to read something he did not fully trust. Then, without another word, he turned and left again. The moment ended as quickly as it began. Later that night, Emily found herself standing near the large window in her room again, her arms wrapped loosely around herself as she looked out into the darkness. The house was asleep, or at least pretending to be. But across the courtyard, that same light was still on. It had not turned off once since she arrived. She frowned slightly, curiosity pulling her closer. Without thinking too much, she slipped out of her room and walked quietly down the hallway, her bare feet soft against the floor. The closer she got, the more she noticed the details, the faint hum of electricity, the subtle scent of something clinical in the air, something clean but distant. The door to his room was not fully closed, just slightly open. Emily stopped a few steps away, her breath slowing, her hand almost lifting before she caught herself. She should not be here. She knew that. But then she heard it, a quiet sound, uneven, like someone trying to steady their breathing. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to feel real. Emily froze. For the first time since she met him, something did not match the image of control he carried so perfectly. The light inside flickered softly against the floor, and in that small gap between the door and the frame, Emily realized something that made her chest tighten in a quiet, unexpected way. The man everyone saw as untouchable might not be as unbreakable as he looked. Emily did not push the door open that night. She stayed where she was, her hand slowly lowering back to her side as the quiet, uneven sound from inside the room faded into a stillness that felt heavier than before, and something inside her told her that whatever she had just heard was not meant to be seen, not meant to be shared. So she turned and walked back to her room without making a sound, but the image stayed with her. The light, the silence, the sense that behind all that control was something fragile trying very hard not to be noticed. And the next morning, everything looked the same again. The house was spotless, the air calm, the staff moving like shadows who knew exactly where to be and when to disappear, as if nothing ever disrupted the rhythm here. But Emily noticed things now that she had not before, small things, like the untouched coffee that appeared every morning outside a closed door, or the way no one ever knocked on that side of the hallway, as if there was an unspoken boundary no one dared to cross. And later that afternoon, as she walked through the living room, she found something that made her stop, a small bottle placed carelessly on the edge of a table, something that did not match the perfection of everything else. She picked it up slowly, reading the label without fully understanding it, but recognizing enough to know it was not something ordinary, her fingers tightening slightly around it before she set it back exactly where it had been. As if touching it already felt like stepping too far into a space she was not invited into. And that evening, she saw him again, not across a table this time, but standing near the window in the main hall, his posture straight, his expression calm, but there was a faint tension in the way his hand rested against the glass, like he was grounding himself in something no one else could see. Emily hesitated. Before walking closer, not too close, just enough for her presence to be noticed without forcing it. "You forgot your coffee this morning," she said softly, her voice careful, not accusing, not curious, just present. Alexander did not turn immediately, and for a moment she thought he might ignore her again. But then he spoke, his tone even. "I do not always need it." Emily nodded slightly, though she could see the faint shadows under his eyes more clearly now, deeper than before. "You should rest," she added gently, the words slipping out before she could stop them. And that made him turn, slowly, his eyes meeting hers with something sharper this time. Not anger, but something guarded, something that questioned her place in saying that. "You do not need to concern yourself with me," he said, not cold, but firm enough to draw a line. Emily felt the weight of that boundary, but she did not step back, not completely. "I know," she replied quietly. "I just thought someone should." The silence that followed was different this time, not empty, but filled with something unspoken, something that lingered between them longer than expected. And for the first time, Alexander did not look away. Immediately, his gaze stayed on her, studying, as if trying to understand why she was still standing there, why she had not learned to keep her distance like everyone else. And then, almost imperceptibly, something in his expression shifted, not softened, not yet, but less closed than before, just for a second, before he turned again and walked away, leaving Emily standing there with a quiet realization settling in her chest, that this was not just a house full of silence. It was a place built, at first, only that same unsteady rhythm, and something in her chest tightened, not fear, but recognition, the kind that does not need explanation. She pushed the door open just slightly more, careful, slow, and what she saw was not dramatic, not the kind of moment anyone else would notice, but it was real. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in his shirt, sleeves slightly rolled, his hand pressed lightly against his chest, as if grounding himself, his breathing controlled but not steady, like he was trying to hold something in place that kept slipping. And for the first time, he did not look untouchable. He looked tired, deeply tired. Emily stepped inside quietly, closing the door just enough to keep the space soft, not sealed. "You are not supposed to be here," he said, his voice low, not sharp, just strained at the edges. She nodded once, acknowledging the truth without stepping back. "I know," she replied gently. "But you do not look like you should be alone, right?" Looked at her again, really looked this time, not as a stranger, not as a responsibility, but as someone standing in his space without fear, without expectation, just there. And for a second, something shifted, not fully, not enough to change everything, but enough to be felt, like a crack in something that had been sealed for too long. "You should go back to your room," he said quietly, but there was no edge to it this time. No distance pushed between them. Emily nodded, understanding the line he was trying to keep, but before she turned, she added softly, "I will be here if you need anything." She did not wait for a response. She simply left, closing the door gently behind her. And as she walked back down the hallway, something inside her felt different, not heavier, but clearer, like she had just stepped into a part of his world no one else was allowed to see. And somewhere behind that closed door, for the first time since she arrived, Alexander Hayes was not completely alone. The next morning felt quieter than usual, but not in the same empty way as before. It was a different kind of quiet, one that carried something unspoken between them, something that had shifted during the night and had not yet settled into place. Emily noticed it immediately when she stepped into the kitchen and found a cup already prepared on the counter, still warm, placed slightly off-center as if someone had hesitated before leaving it there. She paused, her fingers brushing lightly against the ceramic, and for a second she just stood there, not smiling, not reacting too much, but feeling it, the small difference, the quiet change. She picked it up slowly, bringing it closer, the warmth spreading into her hands, and without thinking too much, she took a sip. It was simple, nothing special, but it felt intentional, and that was enough to make her heart soften in a way she did not expect. Later that afternoon, as she walked through the garden for the first time, she sensed it again, that subtle awareness, like someone was watching, not in a threatening way, just present. She turned slightly and caught a glimpse of him through the glass wall, standing inside, his posture still, his gaze directed toward her. But the moment their eyes met, he looked away, almost immediately, like the act itself had not been planned. Emily did not call out. She did not move closer. She simply stayed where she was for a moment longer before continuing her walk, giving him the distance he seemed to need, but not pretending she had not seen him. That evening, when she entered the dining room, the table was set again. But this time, there were 2 plates, and when she sat down, she did not have to wait long. Alexander appeared a few minutes later, his steps measured, his expression composed, but there was something slightly different in the way he held himself, less distant, though still careful. He took his seat across from her, not too close, not too far, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, the quiet stretching between them, but not uncomfortable, not entirely. "You should eat while it is still warm," he said finally, his voice calm. Emily nodded softly. "You too," she replied. And this time, he did not ignore it. He reached for his fork, beginning to eat, slowly, as if this small act was something new, something he had not done in a long time. The conversation did not come easily, but it came in small pieces, simple words, brief exchanges, nothing forced, nothing too revealing, but enough to feel real, enough to feel like something was beginning to move. At one point, as Emily reached for her glass, her fingers brushed against his for just a second, the contact light. Accidental, but it lingered in the space between them, both of them pausing for a fraction longer than necessary, neither pulling away too quickly. And in that brief moment, something passed between them, not spoken, not defined, but present. Alexander was the first to move again, but his expression had changed slightly, softer at the edges, like something inside him had shifted without permission. After dinner, as Emily stood to leave, she hesitated for just a moment, then said quietly, "Thank you for the coffee this morning." He looked at her, really looked this time, and though he did not confirm it directly, he did not deny it either. "It was already there," he said, but his voice carried something quieter beneath it, something less distant than before. Emily gave a small nod, understanding more than his words revealed, and as she walked away, she felt it clearly now. This was no longer just a house filled with silence. It was a space where something fragile was beginning to take shape, something neither of them fully understood yet, but neither of them was stepping away from either, and somewhere behind her, Alexander remained where he was, his gaze following her just a second longer than he intended, before he finally turned away, his hand resting briefly against the edge of the table, as if grounding himself again. But this time, the silence around him did not feel quite as heavy as it used to. The change did not break all at once. It came quietly, like a crack forming beneath something that had only just begun to feel steady. And Emily sensed it the moment the car arrived that afternoon, long and black, stopping too sharply at the front of the house. The kind of arrival that did not belong to routine. She was standing near the window when the front door opened and voices entered the space, not loud, but firm, controlled, carrying authority that did not need to raise itself. She had never seen anyone else come here before, not like this. And when she stepped into the hallway, she saw them, two older figures dressed in quiet elegance, their posture straight, their eyes sharp in a way that made the air feel colder. Alexander stood across from them, his expression composed but more guarded than she had ever seen. "We should have been informed," the woman said, her voice calm but edged with something that did not ask for permission. Emily stopped a few steps away, uncertain if she should stay or leave, but it was already too late. The man beside the woman turned slightly, his gaze landing on her with a precision that made her chest tighten. "So this is her," he said, not unkind, but not welcoming either, just observing, measuring. Emily felt the weight of that look, the unspoken question behind it, and for the first time since she arrived, she felt out of place in a way she could not hide. Alexander noticed, his jaw tightening just slightly before he stepped forward, placing himself just enough between her and them, not fully shielding, but not leaving her exposed either. "This is my wife," he said, his voice steady, but there was something beneath it now, something firmer than before. The woman's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, but not in acceptance, more like recognition of something inconvenient. "Your wife," she repeated, then took a slow step closer to Emily, her gaze dropping briefly to the ring on her finger. "And yet, not the one we arranged." The words were not loud, but they landed with a precision that cut through the space. Emily's breath caught, her fingers instinctively tightening, and for a moment, no one spoke, the silence stretching just long enough to make everything feel exposed. Alexander's expression shifted, something darker moving behind his calm exterior. "That is enough," he said quietly, but the authority in his tone changed the room instantly. The man raised a hand, slightly, as if to ease the tension, but his eyes remained fixed on Emily. "We only want clarity," he said, and then, without waiting, he continued, "Your sister disappeared, and instead, we have you, a different name, a different history, a different person entirely." Emily felt the ground beneath her steady but distant, like she was standing inside a moment she had always known would come, but had hoped would stay hidden a little longer. She looked at Alexander then, just for a second, searching for something, anything, but his face had closed again, not cold, not yet, but distant in a way that felt unfamiliar after everything that had begun to soften between them. "Is this true?" the woman asked, her voice quieter now, directed not at Emily, but at him, and that was when everything shifted, because the question was no longer about facts, it was about trust, about whether what had begun between them had been real or built on something that could not hold. Alexander did not answer immediately, his silence stretching just long enough to feel like distance returning, like walls rebuilding themselves one layer at a time. Emily swallowed, her voice barely steady as she spoke. "I did not lie to hurt anyone," she said softly, not defending, not arguing, just telling the truth as it existed for her. But the moment the words left her, she knew they were not enough, because this was never just about intention. It was about what had been broken before she even arrived, and now, standing in the middle of a truth she could no longer hide, Emily realized something with quiet certainty. The space she had slowly begun to belong to was no longer safe, and the man who had just started to see her might be the one who would push her away the furthest. The silence after the truth came out did not break with anger or raised voices. It settled into something colder, something distant, like a door closing slowly but completely. And Emily felt it the moment Alexander stepped back, not toward her, but away, his expression no longer searching, no longer conflicted, just controlled again, like everything that had softened between them had been carefully folded away. "You should have told me," he said finally, his voice low, steady, but stripped of the quiet warmth it had started to carry before. Emily's chest tightened, not because of the words, but because of how they were said, not as a question, not as something he wanted to understand, but as a line already drawn. "I tried," she answered softly, her hands still at her sides, her voice calm even as something inside her shifted. There was never a right moment. Alexander let out a slow breath, his gaze moving away from her for just a second before returning, but this time, there was distance in it, clear and undeniable. "There is always a right moment for the truth," he replied, and the quiet weight of that sentence made everything else feel smaller. The woman stepped forward slightly, her presence reclaiming the room. "This situation needs to be corrected," she said, not unkindly, but with finality, as if Emily was something temporary that had overstayed its place. Alexander did not respond immediately, and for a brief second, Emily allowed herself to hope, not for defense, not for protection, but for something human, something that acknowledged what had grown between them. But it did not come. Instead, he spoke without looking at her. "She will leave." The words were simple, but they landed heavier than anything else that had been said, and just like that, the space between them closed completely. Emily nodded once, not because she agreed, but because she understood. This was the moment everything shifted back to what it had always been meant to be, a temporary arrangement, a role she had stepped into and now had to step out of. She did not argue. She did not explain further, because something inside her knew that no explanation would change the fact that his trust had been broken before it had the chance to fully form. And that kind of fracture did not heal with words. Later that evening, the house returned to silence. But it was not the same silence as before. It was emptier now, like something had been removed from it, something that had just begun to make it feel alive. Emily stood in her room, the suitcase open on the bed, her hands moving slowly as she folded the few things she had brought with her, each movement quiet, careful, like she was trying not to disturb the fragile calm that had settled around her. Her fingers brushed against the ring as she packed, and she paused for a moment, staring at it. The same cold weight that had once felt unfamiliar now felt heavier in a different way, not because it belonged, but because it almost had. She slipped it off slowly, placing it on the table beside the bed, not leaving it behind in anger, just in quiet understanding. This was never meant to be hers, at least not like this. As she closed the suitcase, she glanced once more toward the window, toward the distant light across the courtyard that had once drawn her closer, but tonight, it remained steady and unreachable, like a world she had briefly touched but could no longer step into. And somewhere in another part of the house, Alexander stood alone again, the silence returning to him fully, but this time, it did not feel the same, because now he knew exactly what was missing, and for the first time in a long time, that absence did not feel like peace. Emily left before sunrise, the house still wrapped in that familiar quiet. But this time it did not hold her, it released her, the door closing behind her without resistance, without sound, like even the walls understood that she no longer belonged there. The car waiting for her did not feel like an arrival anymore. It felt like an ending, and as it pulled away, she did not look back, not because she did not want to, but because she knew if she did, it would be harder to leave the part of her that had started to exist in that place, a part that had learned how to stay, how to care, how to see someone beyond what they showed the world, and now, she had to carry that part with her alone. Hours later, the house stood the same, untouched, perfect, silent, but something inside it had shifted in a way that could not be restored. Alexander stood in the dining room, the long table set for two out of habit, not intention, his gaze fixed on the empty chair across from him, and for a moment, he did not move, as if waiting for something that he knew would not come. The stillness pressed against him differently now, not as a comfort, but as something heavier, something that reminded him of what had changed. His hand rested briefly against the table, fingers tightening slightly before he pulled them back, the memory of small moments returning without warning, a quiet voice, a steady presence, a hand offering something without asking for anything in return, and for the first time, those memories did not feel distant. They felt immediate, real, like something he had let go of too quickly. Later that day, the ring caught his attention, left behind on the table in her room, exactly where she had placed it, not thrown, not abandoned, just returned. And when he picked it up, the weight of it felt different than before, not just a symbol, but a choice he had failed to understand in time. His grip tightened for a second, then loosened, a slow breath leaving him as something settled into place. Not anger, not regret alone, but clarity. He had been wrong, not about the truth, but about what mattered, and that realization did not come loudly. It came quietly, the way everything important seemed to come when it was already too late. Except this time, he did not let it end there. By the time evening approached, the house no longer held him the same way. The walls that once felt controlled now felt confining, and without hesitation, he moved, not slowly, not carefully, but with a purpose that had not been there before. Hours later, in a place far from glass walls and silent rooms, Emily stood outside a small building, her suitcase beside her, the air cooler, the world smaller, more familiar, but her chest still heavy with everything she had left behind. She had not expected anything to follow her here, not from that world, not from him. So when she heard her name, soft but clear, she froze before turning, and there he was, not distant, not untouchable, just standing there, his presence real in a way it had never been before, his expression no longer guarded, but open in a way that felt almost unfamiliar. "I was wrong," he said, the words simple, but steady, nothing hidden behind them. Emily looked at him, not moving closer yet, not stepping away either, just listening. "I thought the truth was what mattered most," he continued, his voice quieter now, "but I realized it was you. The space between